The stagecoach lurched to a stop, throwing Eliza Vance forward hard enough that her shoulder slammed into the wooden frame. She didn't make a sound. Years of learning to take hits, literal and otherwise, had taught her that much. "Calder Ranch," the driver called back, his voice flat with disinterest. "End of the line." Eliza pushed the door open and stepped down onto ground that felt like it might swallow her whole. The dust rose around her boots, fine and suffocating, the kind that got into everything and never quite left. She'd brought one bag. Everything she owned fit inside it, which said plenty about the life she was leaving behind. The ranch stretched out before her like a punishment. Buildings weathered gray by wind and sun, fences that looked like they were holding themselves together through sheer stubbornness. Beyond that, nothing but land, endless, brutal, indifferent. The kind of place that didn't care if you lived or died. Perfect. "You sure about this, miss?" The driver was looking at her like she'd just announced plans to walk into hell with a smile. "Calder ain't exactly welcoming." "I'm sure." "Your funeral." He didn't wait for a response, just snapped the reins and left her standing there in a cloud of dust that tasted like regret and bad decisions. Eliza picked up her bag and started walking toward the main house. The sun was already brutal, even though it couldn't be past 9 in the morning, and she could feel sweat starting to gather under her collar. Her dress was practical, dark, heavy enough to last, but it wasn't made for this kind of heat. Nothing she owned was made for this place. The front door opened before she reached it. The man who emerged looked like he'd been carved from the same unforgiving stone as the land around him. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that might have been handsome if it hadn't been set in such permanent hardness. His eyes were the color of winter sky, cold and distant. They swept over her once, assessing, dismissing. "Eliza Vance?" His voice matched everything else about him. No warmth, no welcome. "That's right." "Rhett Calder, you're late." She bit back the urge to point out that the stagecoach schedule wasn't exactly under her control. The driver said, "Don't care what the driver said. You're late." He turned and walked back into the house without waiting to see if she'd follow. Eliza stood there for a moment, letting the anger wash through her and then drain away. She'd dealt with worse than rudeness. Much worse. This was just another obstacle, and she'd learned long ago how to swallow her pride when survival demanded it. The inside of the house was marginally cooler, but just as unwelcoming. Sparse furniture, everything functional and nothing beautiful. The kind of place where people existed rather than lived. Rhett was already at a table near the window studying what looked like account books. "You'll work 6 days a week," he said without looking up. "Sundays you can do what you want, long as the animals are fed. You'll get meals and a place to sleep. Wages are standard." The posting said room and board plus $30 a month. "That's what I said. Standard." He finally looked at her, and there was something in that gaze that made her want to take a step back. Not cruelty exactly, but an absence, like he was looking through her rather than at her. "You'll handle cooking, cleaning, laundry. Help with the animals when needed. I've got 2 ranch hands who stay in the bunkhouse. They take care of themselves, but you'll be expected to keep this house running." "Understood." "One more thing." He closed the book with a sound like a gavel. "I don't tolerate gossip, complaining, or questions about things that aren't your business. You do your work, stay out of my way, we'll get along fine. And if we don't get along fine, then you'll find yourself back on that stagecoach, assuming you last long enough to make it that far." He stood, and she realized just how much he towered over her. "Your room's upstairs, second door on the left. Supper's at 6. Don't be late for that either." He walked past her and out the door, and Eliza was left standing in the dim house with the taste of dust still in her mouth and the beginnings of doubt creeping up her spine. She crushed it down. Doubt was a luxury she couldn't afford. The room was small, hot, and smelled faintly of old wood and resignation. A bed that had seen better years, a washstand, a single window that looked out over more of that endless, punishing landscape. Eliza set her bag down and sat on the edge of the bed, letting herself have exactly 1 minute of weakness. She was 32 years old and had nothing to show for it except scars you couldn't see and a talent for enduring things that should have broken her. 3 years ago, she'd been married, briefly, disastrously, to a man who'd seemed charming right up until the moment he wasn't. When she'd finally gathered the courage to leave, she'd discovered that courage didn't pay rent or put food on the table. The jobs had been scarce and getting scarcer. Women with her particular kind of past, divorced, alone, no family to vouch for her, weren't exactly welcomed with open arms. She'd worked in a laundry until the owner's son had started getting ideas that ended with her unemployment. A boarding house after that, until the proprietor decided she was attracting the wrong kind of attention just by existing. The posting for Calder Ranch had been her last option, remote enough that her reputation wouldn't follow her, desperate enough to hire a woman with no references except her own insistence that she was a hard worker. She'd lied about that last part. Not about being a hard worker, she was, but about having no references. She'd had them. They just didn't say what any decent employer would want to hear. The minute was up. Eliza stood, smoothed her skirt, and went to find out exactly what she'd gotten herself into. The kitchen was surprisingly well equipped, though it had the air of a space that hadn't been properly used in a long time. Dust on the higher shelves, a faint smell of disuse hanging in the corners. The stove was good quality, at least, and there were provisions enough to work with. She was elbow-deep in preparing something that might pass for supper when she heard voices outside. Male voices. Rough with the kind of laughter that came from men who spent more time with horses than people. Telling you, he's lost his damn mind hiring a woman. Ain't our business, Cole. Is when she can't keep up and we gotta pick up the slack. Look at her, probably never done a real day's work in her life. Eliza set down the knife she'd been using and walked to the window. Two men were crossing the yard toward the bunkhouse, both sun-weathered and trail-worn. The one doing most of the talking was younger, maybe mid-20s, with the kind of swagger that usually meant trouble. The other was older, graying, with a face that suggested he'd learned long ago to keep his opinions to himself. She could march out there and tell them exactly what she thought of their assumptions. Could make it clear from day one that she wasn't someone to be dismissed. Instead, she went back to the stove. Words were cheap. Let them wait and see what she could actually do. By 6 o'clock, she had supper ready. Nothing fancy, but hot and substantial. Beef stew with vegetables from the root cellar, biscuits that had turned out better than she'd hoped, coffee strong enough to strip paint. She'd found a tablecloth in one of the cupboards and shaken the dust from it, set places for 4. Rhett came in exactly at 6, the 2 ranch hands trailing behind him. Up close, she could see the younger one, Cole, she remembered, taking in the setup with something like surprise. The older man just nodded at her, polite enough. "This is Eliza Vance," Rhett said, his tone making it clear this was a formality he'd rather skip. "She'll be keeping house. Eliza, that's Cole Brennan and Sam Hutch." "Ma'am," Sam said. Cole just stared, then shrugged and dropped into a chair. The meal was eaten in near silence, which suited Eliza fine. She'd grown up in a house where dinner conversation was a performance, all polite lies and careful navigation of her father's moods. This felt almost restful by comparison, even if the tension in the room was thick enough to cut. "Stew's good," Sam said after a while. "Thank you." Cole made a non-committal sound that could have meant anything. Rhett said nothing at all, just ate with the mechanical efficiency of someone fueling a machine. When he was done, he stood, pushed his chair back, and left without a word. Cole followed immediately, but Sam lingered, helping her clear the plates without being asked. "Don't mind Cole," he said quietly. "He's young." "That's not an excuse." "No, ma'am, it's not. But Rhett don't tolerate disrespect toward those who work here. Cole will learn, or he'll leave." He paused at the door. "It's good to have proper cooking again. Been a while." After he left, Eliza stood in the kitchen with her hands in dishwater and let herself feel the exhaustion she'd been holding off all day. Her back ached, her feet hurt, and she had no illusions that tomorrow would be any easier. But she'd survived the first day. That counted for something. The days blurred together after that, one brutal sunrise bleeding into the next. Eliza learned the rhythm of the ranch the way you learn to swim by being thrown into deep water, desperately, with no choice but to figure it out or go under. She was up before dawn every morning, getting the stove going, starting coffee, putting together breakfast that would sustain men doing hard physical labor, then cleaning, laundry that seemed to generate itself overnight, mending, managing provisions, preparing lunch, more cleaning, starting supper. The work was endless and unforgiving, and her hands developed blisters that became calluses that cracked and bled and healed tougher than before. Rhett remained a distant, cold presence. He spoke to her only when necessary, never offered praise or criticism beyond the occasional fine if she asked if something was acceptable. He took his meals, did his work, and disappeared into whatever grief or anger drove him with a regularity that was almost comforting in its predictability. Cole continued to radiate hostility, though it became more passive as the days went on. Sam was quietly kind, the sort of man who'd lived long enough to recognize that cruelty cost more than it was worth. 3 weeks in, Eliza was hanging laundry when she noticed the garden, or what had been a garden once. Now it was mostly weeds and dead soil, but there were remnants of stone borders, a water system that might still work with some repair. Used to be real pretty. She turned to find Sam watching her, his expression soft with memory. Who tended it? Rhett's wife, Sarah. This was her favorite place on the whole ranch. He looked away toward the mountains in the distance. Been 3 years now since she passed. Fever took her fast. Rhett ain't been the same since. I'm sorry. We all are. But sorry don't bring anyone back, and it don't make the living any easier. He met her eyes. You thinking of fixing it up? Maybe. If there's time. Time's the one thing this place has plenty of. Ain't nobody gonna stop you. That evening, after the supper dishes were done, Eliza went back out to the garden with a hose she'd found in the barn. The sun was setting, turning the sky the color of a healing bruise, and the heat had finally broken enough to make physical labor bearable. She started clearing weeds. It was meditative work, mindless, and she let her thoughts drift as her hands stayed busy. She thought about Sarah Calder, who must have stood in this exact spot, planning what to plant, imagining beauty in the middle of all this hardness. She thought about her own mother, who'd tended a garden with ruthless precision, not for beauty, but for control, for the illusion of order in a house that had none where it mattered. What are you doing? Rhett's voice cut through her thoughts like a blade. She turned to find him standing at the edge of the garden, silhouetted against the dying light. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his posture that suggested violence held barely in check. Clearing the garden beds. I didn't tell you to do that. You didn't tell me not to. I'm telling you now, leave it alone. He turned and walked away, and Eliza stood there with dirt under her nails and anger burning in her chest. For a moment, just a moment, she considered ignoring him, continuing with the work just to prove she could. But she'd meant what she said about survival. Pride was expensive, and she couldn't afford it. Not yet. She put the hoe away and went inside. The town was 7 miles away, close enough to reach but far enough to feel isolated. Once a month, Rhett made the trip for supplies, and on a hot morning in early August, he told Eliza she was coming along. Need to know what we use, what we need. Can't keep guessing at the orders. It was the most words he'd strung together in her direction since she'd arrived, and she nodded, grateful for the chance to see something beyond the ranch's borders. The ride was silent. Rhett drove the wagon with the same grim efficiency he applied to everything, and Eliza watched the landscape roll past. More of the same brutal beauty, land that didn't apologize for what it was. The town was called Salvation, which struck her as optimistic to the point of delusion. It was bigger than she'd expected, with a main street that boasted a general store, a saloon, a church, and various other establishments that suggested civilization was making a tentative foothold here. The general store was run by a man named Amos Fletcher, round and jovial in a way that seemed incompatible with his surroundings. He greeted Rhett with the careful friendliness of someone who knew better than to push for warmth that wouldn't be returned. "And who's this?" "Housekeeper," Rhett said. "Well, now that's fine. Always good to see a new face. I'm Amos. You need anything, you just ask." He was already pulling items from the list Rhett had provided, keeping up a steady stream of chatter that required no response. Been a quiet month, mostly. Oh, though I should mention, Silas Boone's been buying up land again. Picked up the Morrison place last week. Something flickered across Rhett's face, too quick to read. Morrison sell voluntarily? Depends on your definition of voluntary. Boone made him an offer after the bank started making noises about the mortgage. You know how it goes. I know exactly how it goes. Amos had the sense to change the subject after that. and they finished the transaction in relative quiet. Eliza was loading the last of the supplies when she felt eyes on her. She turned to find 3 men standing across the street, watching. Not with friendly curiosity, with assessment, calculation. "Don't mind them," Amos said quietly. "Boone's men, they're always around, making sure everyone knows who runs things." "And who runs things? Officially? The law? Unofficially?" He shrugged. "Silas Boone owns half the valley and aims to own the rest. Man like that doesn't take kindly to anyone standing in his way." "Is Rhett in his way?" "Rhett's got land Boone wants and a stubborn streak that won't let him sell. So yeah, I'd say he's in the way." Amos glanced at the men across the street, then back at her. "You be careful out there at the ranch. Boone's patient, but he ain't kind." On the ride back, Eliza couldn't stop thinking about those men and the way they'd looked at her, like she was already counted among the obstacles to be removed. "This Silas Boone," she said, breaking the silence. "Is he trouble?" "He's always trouble." Rhett's hands tightened on the reins. "But he's not your concern. You do your job, stay out of sight when anyone comes around, and you'll be fine." "And if I can't stay out of sight?" "Then we'll deal with it when it happens." It wasn't reassuring, but Eliza hadn't expected reassurance. She'd expected exactly what she got. A glimpse of the bigger picture, the forces moving around the ranch like wolves circling something wounded. She'd been cast off, thrown away, dismissed as worthless by the world she'd left behind. But she was starting to understand that out here, in this brutal place, maybe that didn't matter. Maybe what mattered was whether you could hold your ground when the wolves came calling. And Eliza Vance was very tired of running. But August gave way to September, and the heat began to break, replaced by winds that had teeth. Eliza settled into the rhythm of the ranch with a determination that bordered on obsession. She learned which chores could be rushed and which required patience. She learned that Cole was more bark than bite, that Sam had a dry sense of humor that emerged when you least expected it, that Rhett's silences had different textures, some angry, some sad, all impenetrable. She also learned that the ranch was struggling. The account books Rhett sometimes left on the kitchen table told a story of margins getting thinner, debts held at bay but not defeated, a constant battle against forces that didn't care about anyone's determination to survive. One evening, she found him standing at the fence line, staring out at land that looked like it went on forever. The sun was setting behind him, and for a moment he looked less like the hard, closed-off man she'd come to know, and more like someone carrying a weight that was slowly crushing him. Sarah loved this time of day. He didn't look at her, might not have even realized he was speaking out loud. Said it was when the land remembered it could be beautiful. Eliza stayed quiet, sensing that whatever this moment was, it wasn't meant for conversation. "I can't lose this place." His voice was barely above a whisper, rough with something that might have been fear if he'd allowed himself to feel it. "It's all I've got left of her, of us, of anything that mattered. You won't lose it. You don't know that." "No," she agreed. "But I know you won't go down without a fight, and for what it's worth, you're not fighting alone." He turned to look at her then, really look at her, and something in his expression shifted. Not warmth exactly, but recognition. Acknowledgement. "Why do you care? This isn't your fight." "Maybe I'm tired of not having anything worth fighting for." They stood there as darkness gathered, two people battered by life and circumstance, connected by nothing except the stubborn refusal to surrender. It wasn't friendship, wasn't understanding, but it was something, a foundation maybe, for whatever came next. The wolves were circling, but Eliza Vance had stopped running, and she'd be damned if she'd start again now. The trouble came on a Wednesday. Eliza was in the kitchen making bread when she heard horses approaching, too many horses, moving too fast. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to the window, her stomach already tightening with dread. 5 men rode into the yard, and even at a distance she could tell they weren't friendly visitors. They moved with a kind of casual arrogance that came from knowing you had power and weren't afraid to use it. At their head was a man she didn't recognize, but somehow knew immediately must be Silas Boone. He was older than she'd expected, maybe 60, but age hadn't softened him. If anything, it had refined his cruelty into something sharper, more dangerous. He sat his horse like a king surveying land that belonged to him, whether the deed said so or not. Red emerged from the barn, Sam and Cole flanking him. The yard felt like a powder keg waiting for a spark. Boone, Rhett's voice carried despite not being raised. You're not welcome here. Now, that's unfriendly, Calder. Boone's smile was all teeth and no humor. I come in good faith with another offer for this place. A generous offer. Already told you, not selling. That was 6 months ago. Circumstances change. I hear you're having trouble meeting your obligations. You hear wrong. Do I? Boone glanced around the yard, his gaze cataloging every sign of struggle, every hint of desperation. This is hard country, Rhett. Man alone can't hold it, especially not a man haunted by ghosts. Get off my land! I'll leave when I'm ready. Boone's smile faded, replaced by something cold and final. One way or another, this ranch will be mine. You can accept that with dignity and take my money, or you can fight and lose everything. Your choice. That's when Eliza stepped out onto the porch. She didn't plan it, didn't think it through. One moment she was watching through the window, the next she was standing in the open air with all eyes on her. She felt exposed, vulnerable, but she'd learned long ago how to hide fear behind a mask of composure. I believe Mr. Calder asked you to leave. Boone's gaze swung to her, and she felt the weight of his attention like a physical thing. He studied her the way you'd study livestock, assessing value and use. Well now, who might you be? That's not your business. Anything on this land is my business. He leaned forward in his saddle. You must be new. Let me give you some advice, woman. Men like Calder, they're relics. They hold on to things that are already gone, and they drag down everyone around them when they fall. You're young enough to start over. Don't tie yourself to a sinking ship. The only ship sinking here is yours. Eliza's voice stayed level, but her hands were shaking and she clasped them behind her back. Now get off this property before what? One of Boone's men, younger and mean-looking, laughed. What exactly do you think you're going to do? She didn't have an answer for that. Didn't have a plan, didn't have backup, didn't have anything except the bone-deep certainty that she was done backing down. Eliza, Rhett's voice cut through the tension. Go inside. No, that's not a request. I don't care. She kept her eyes on Boone. These men are trespassing. They've been asked to leave. If they don't, we'll take appropriate action. Appropriate action. Boone chuckled, a sound like gravel in a tin can. I like you. You've got spine. It's going to be a shame when... The shotgun blast cut him off mid-sentence. For a frozen moment, everyone stared at Sam, who'd pulled the weapon from seemingly nowhere and fired it into the air. The echo rolled across the valley like thunder. Next one goes lower, Sam said calmly. Mr. Calder asked you to leave. The lady asked you to leave. I ain't asking. I'm telling, and I don't miss. Boone's face went through several expressions. Shock, rage, calculation. Finally, he laughed again, but it sounded forced. You're making a mistake, Calder, all of you. He pulled his horse around, his men following suit. This valley's changing. You can change with it or get buried by it. Think about that. They rode out, dust rising behind them like smoke. Eliza stayed on the porch until they were out of sight, then felt her knees start to buckle. She grabbed the railing and held on, breathing hard. Rhett was beside her in 2 strides, his hand on her arm, steadying her. That was stupid, he said. Probably. Could have gotten us all killed. But it didn't. He stared at her, and she could see him struggling with something, anger maybe, or the beginnings of respect he didn't want to feel. Don't do it again. Can't promise that. His grip tightened for a moment, then released. Sam. Thanks. Anytime, boss. Sam was already walking back toward the barn, the shotgun slung over his shoulder like it was the most natural thing in the world. Cole had gone pale during the confrontation and stayed that way. They'll be back, he said, his earlier swagger completely gone. Boone, don't forget. No, Rhett agreed. He doesn't. Which means we need to be ready. He looked at Eliza, really looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Not acceptance exactly, but acknowledgement. She'd proven something today, though she wasn't entirely sure what. Come on, he said. Let's get back to work. Ranch won't run itself. As they walked back toward their respective tasks, Eliza felt something shift inside her. She'd stood her ground. She'd refused to break. And somehow, in a place that seemed designed to crush hope, She'd found the first stirrings of something that might become belonging. The wolves were still circling, but maybe, just maybe, they'd underestimated what they were hunting. That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. She lay in her small, hot room listening to the wind rattle the windows and thought about Boone's threat, about the casual way he'd discussed destroying everything Rhett had left, about the look in that young rider's eyes, the kind of casual cruelty that came from never facing consequences. She thought about all the times she'd been powerless, all the moments when circumstances had dictated her choices and she'd had no option except to endure, the husband who'd turned violent, the employers who'd taken advantage, the society that had marked her as disposable. This felt different. Here, at the edge of nowhere, she'd found something she hadn't expected, the possibility of standing firm, of mattering, not because of who she'd been or what people thought of her, but because of what she was willing to do. It was terrifying. It was also the first thing in years that felt like it might be worth the fear. She finally fell asleep as dawn was breaking and dreamed of gardens and shotgun blasts and a future that hadn't been decided yet. The days after Boone's visit carried a different weight. The ranch hadn't changed. Same backbreaking work, same relentless sun, same silence that stretched for miles. But something underneath had shifted. Everyone moved a little faster, watched the horizon a little closer, jumped at sounds that wouldn't have registered before. Eliza found herself checking the road every time she passed a window, her stomach tight with anticipation that never quite faded. She told herself it was just vigilance, smart caution in the face of a real threat. But late at night, when sleep wouldn't come, she had to admit the truth. She was afraid, not of Boone himself, but of what his return might cost the fragile thing she'd started building here. Rhett threw himself into work with an intensity that bordered on punishing. He was up before dawn and didn't stop until well after dark, repairing fences that had been neglected, reinforcing the barn's foundation, organizing supplies with military precision. Sam and Cole followed his lead, though Cole's movements had taken on a nervous quality that made Eliza wonder if he'd bolt at the first sign of real trouble. On the 5th day after the confrontation, Eliza was hauling water from the well when she saw Rhett standing by the barn, staring at something in his hands. As she got closer, she realized it was a photograph, faded, creased, the kind of treasure you carried until it fell apart. "That's Sarah?" she asked quietly. He didn't startle, didn't seem surprised she was there. "Yeah." The woman in the photograph had kind eyes and a smile that suggested she'd found something worth smiling about even in this hard place. She looked young, though Eliza knew that could be deceptive. This country aged people fast. She was beautiful. She was stubborn. His voice carried something that might have been affection if grief hadn't swallowed most of it. Insisted we could make something here. Her family thought she was crazy, marrying me and moving to the middle of nowhere. Maybe she was. Or maybe she saw something worth fighting for. Yeah, well. He tucked the photograph back into his shirt pocket. Fighting only matters if you win. And I'm not sure we can. It was the most honest thing he'd said to her, and the defeat in his voice cut deeper than she'd expected. "You think Boone's going to take the ranch?" "I think Boone takes what he wants, always has. The law here," he laughed, bitter. "The law answers to whoever has the most money, and that ain't me. So what are you going to do?" "What I've been doing. Work, hold the line, hope it's enough." He met her eyes, and she saw exhaustion there, bone deep and relentless. "You should leave, Eliza, before this gets ugly." "No. It's not your fight. I'm tired of running from fights." She surprised herself with the vehemence in her voice. "I've spent years letting other people decide what I deserved, where I belonged, what I was worth. I'm done with that. You want me gone, you'll have to throw me out." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or the beginning of respect he wasn't ready to acknowledge. "You're either brave or stupid." "Probably both. But I'm staying." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "All right, but don't say I didn't warn you when this all goes to hell." That night at supper, Sam cleared his throat in the way he did when he had something to say, but wasn't sure how it'd be received. "Been thinking," he started, pushing food around his plate. "We might want to consider bringing in some help. Few more hands, just until—" "Can't afford it," Rhett cut him off. "I know the money's tight, but—" "Not tight. Gone. We're barely making payroll as it is. He set down his fork with more force than necessary. I'm not taking on debt I can't pay. That's how Boone gets you. Offers to help, extends credit, and before you know it, he owns everything. So we just wait for him to make his move? Cole's voice cracked slightly. Hope he gets bored and leaves us alone? You got a better idea? Cole looked away, and the silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Eliza watched them all, these men trying to figure out how to protect something they knew might be lost already, and felt anger building in her chest. Maybe there's another way, she said. 3 pairs of eyes turned to her. I'm listening, Rhett said, though his tone suggested he wasn't expecting much. The people in town, the other ranchers, they can't all love Boone. If he's been buying up land and pushing people around, there have to be others who'd stand with us. Stand with us how? Sam asked. Most folks are too scared or too bought off to cross him. Then we find the ones who aren't. We make alliances, strengthen numbers, right? Rhett shook his head. You don't understand how this works. Boone's been building power for years. The sheriff's in his pocket. The bank answers to him. Even the people who hate him know better than to... So we just give up? Eliza heard her voice rising and didn't care. Roll over and let him take everything? That's your plan? My plan is to not get good people killed for a lost cause. Maybe it's only lost because you've already decided it is. The words hung in the air like smoke. Rhett's jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he might explode. Instead, he stood, his chair scraping against the floor with a sound like tearing metal. You've been here 2 months. Don't presume to tell me what's possible in my own damn valley. He walked out, the door slamming behind him with enough force to rattle the windows. Sam exhaled slowly. Well, that went about as expected. She ain't wrong, though, Cole said quietly. Both Eliza and Sam turned to look at him. He shrugged, defensive. What? She ain't. We can't fight Boone alone. Everyone knows it. Knowing it and doing something about it are different things, Sam said. He looked at Eliza with something like sympathy. Rhett's got reasons for being the way he is. When Sarah died, it broke something in him. He stopped believing in anything except survival. Then maybe he needs someone to believe for him. Maybe. Or maybe you're going to get your heart broken trying to save a man who don't want saving. Sam stood, collecting plates. But that's your choice to make, I suppose. After they'd left and she was alone with the dishes, Eliza let herself feel the full weight of what she'd taken on. Sam was right. She barely knew these people, barely understood the forces arrayed against them. She was a housekeeper with no money, no power, and no real reason to think she could make a difference. But she'd meant what she'd said. She was done running. If this was the hill she died on, at least it would be her choice. The next morning, she found Rhett already working in the barn, mucking out stalls with a grim determination that suggested he'd been at it for hours. He didn't look up when she approached. I'm going to town, she announced. No, you're not. I'm taking the wagon. I need supplies anyway, and I'm going to talk to people, see if anyone's willing to... I said no. He threw the pitchfork down and turned to face her, his expression thunderous. You go into town asking questions about Boone, you're going to put a target on your back. On all our backs. The target's already there. At least let me try to do something about it. Why? Why does this matter so much to you? The question caught her off guard, and she found herself answering more honestly than she'd intended. Because for the first time in my life, I'm somewhere that matters, not because of who my family was or who I married or what people think of me, but because of what I can actually do. I can cook and clean and work hard, and that's worth something here. It's worth something to you, even if you won't admit it. She took a breath. I'm not going to watch Boone take that away without trying to stop him, even if it's stupid, even if we lose. Rhett stared at her for a long moment, and she could see him wrestling with something. Anger, fear, the desperate need to protect what he had left, warring against the knowledge that he couldn't do it alone. You're going to get hurt, he said finally. Probably, but that's my problem. No, it's not. Not anymore. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. You work here. That makes you my responsibility. If something happens to you because I let you go into town and stick your neck out, I'm not asking for permission. I'm telling you what I'm doing. Damn it, Eliza, I'm going. You can come with me or not, but I'm going. She turned and walked out before he could argue further, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack a rib. Behind her, she heard him curse, creative and emphatic, and then the sound of his boots following. The ride into town was tense and silent. Rhett drove with his jaw clenched and his eyes fixed on the road like he was planning a battle strategy. Eliza sat beside him, trying to figure out what exactly she was going to say when they got there. She hadn't thought this through, she realized. She'd been running on anger and determination, but actual planning had fallen by the wayside. Salvation looked different this time, or maybe she was seeing it through different eyes. The buildings still weathered and worn, the streets still dusty and sparse, but now she noticed the way people moved, quick, nervous, always watching, the way they avoided eye contact with certain men, the way the saloon doors stayed closed, even in the heat. This was a town that had learned to be afraid. Amos Fletcher looked up as they entered the general store, his usual joviality flickering when he saw who it was. "Rhett, Miss Vance, what can I do for you folks today?" "Need to stock up on some things," Eliza said, pulling out the list she'd made. "But I also wanted to ask you about something." Amos's expression shuddered immediately. "I'm not sure I can help with anything beyond supplies, ma'am." "You haven't heard what I'm asking yet. Don't need to. If it's about Boone, the answer's no. To whatever it is, the answer's no." Rhett made a sound that might have been satisfaction, like this proved his point. Eliza ignored him. "Boone came to the ranch last week, threatened us, tried to force Rhett to sell. I'm sorry to hear that, but how many other people has he done that to? How many ranchers and farmers has he pushed out or bought out or scared off? Miss Vance, please." Amos glanced toward the door like he expected someone to burst through at any moment. "I've got a business to run, a family to feed. I can't afford to—" "Can you afford to live in a valley that one man controls, where you've got no say in your own future because someone else decided they own everything? Better than not living at all." The words came out harsh, and Amos immediately looked sorry for them. He lowered his voice. "You don't know what he's capable of. The Morrison place. You heard it was sold? What you didn't hear is that Morrison's son wound up with a broken leg a week before that sale went through. Accident, officially. Everyone knows different." Eliza felt ice slide down her spine. The law is a man named Tucker who wears a badge because Boone lets him. Tucker's not a bad man exactly, but he knows where his bread's buttered, and it ain't buttered by standing up to Silas Boone. So everyone just accepts it? Everyone survives. Amos started pulling items from the shelves, his movements jerky with suppressed emotion. "Look, I'm sorry. I wish I could help, but I got 3 kids and a wife who deserves better than what she'd get if I ended up dead or run out of town. You understand?" Eliza did understand. She hated it, but she understood. They left the store with supplies and nothing else, and Rhett's silence felt pointed, like he was waiting for her to admit defeat. Instead, she marched straight across the street to the saloon. "What are you doing?" Rhett caught her arm. "Talking to people. Come on." The saloon was dim and smelled of stale beer and older regrets. A few men sat at tables, nursing drinks and avoiding eye contact. The bartender was a woman. That surprised Eliza, maybe 40, with tired eyes and efficient hands. "Help you?" she asked, not unfriendly but not warm either. "I'm looking for people who might want to stand up to Silas Boone." The woman's expression didn't change, but one eyebrow went up. "That's so. And what exactly did you plan to do once you found them?" "I don't know yet. But doing nothing isn't working." "Doing something ain't working either. Ask the Morrisons, ask the Hendersons before they packed up and left. Ask Bill Carter, who stood up to Boone 3 years ago and ended up losing everything." She leaned forward. "You seem like a nice enough lady. Take my advice. Keep your head down, do your work, and hope Boone forgets you exist." "What's your name?" Eliza asked. "Martha." "Martha, you run this place?" "I do." "Then you know what it's like. Running something in a world that doesn't think you should, having to fight twice as hard for half the respect." Eliza met her eyes. "I'm not asking you to throw yourself on a sword. I'm just asking if you're tired of living scared." Martha studied her for a long moment, and something shifted in her expression. Not agreement exactly, but recognition, understanding. "Tired don't mean stupid," she said finally. "But yeah, I'm tired. We're all tired. Question is, what can any of us actually do about it?" "I don't know yet. But if we figure it out, can we count on you? Martha glanced at Rhett, who'd been standing silent through this whole exchange. Calder, you on board with this crazy scheme? No, Rhett said flatly. But apparently that doesn't matter. Huh, Martha smiled slightly. All right, you figure out a plan that ain't suicide, you come back and tell me. I won't promise anything, but I'll listen. Fair? Fair. As they left the saloon, Eliza felt something like hope beginning to take root. It wasn't much, 2 people who'd said maybe, not yes, but it was more than they'd had an hour ago. You're insane, Rhett said as they climbed back onto the wagon. Probably. This isn't going to work, talking to people, making alliances. Boone's been at this for decades. He knows how to break resistance before it even forms. Then we'll have to be smarter than he expects. We'll have to be lucky. And I'm not a lucky man, Eliza. She looked at him, this hard, grieving man who'd given her a chance when no one else would. Maybe your luck's changing. Or maybe we're both about to find out just how bad it can get. They rode back in silence, but it was different this time. Not hostile exactly, but contemplative. Like they were both trying to figure out what they'd started and whether they'd survive it. When they got back to the ranch, Sam was waiting in the yard, his expression grim. We got a problem, he said. What now? Rhett jumped down from the wagon. The water. Someone diverted the creek upstream. The flow's down to a trickle. Eliza felt her stomach drop. Water was everything out here. Without it, the livestock would suffer, the crops would die, the ranch would become uninhabitable within weeks. How far upstream? Rhett's voice had gone deadly quiet. Mile, maybe 2. I didn't get close enough to see who did it, but we know who did it. Rhett turned to Eliza, and she saw something new in his eyes. Not defeat anymore, but cold rage. Still think talking's going to fix this? I think whoever did it wants you to react. Wants you to do something stupid so they have an excuse to what? I'm already losing everything. He grabbed her shoulders, and she felt the desperation in his grip. The water's gone. The money's almost gone. And now you've gone and poked the bear by asking questions in town. What exactly is your plan here, Eliza? Hope Boone has a change of heart? My plan is to not give up. Well, maybe giving up is the smart play. Then why haven't you? Her voice cut through his anger like a knife. If giving up was smart, you'd have done it already. Sold to Boone, taken the money, started over somewhere else. But you didn't. You're still here, still fighting, because deep down you know this place is worth saving. Sarah knew it. You know it, and I know it too. He let go of her shoulders and stepped back, breathing hard. Sam had diplomatically found something to busy himself with, giving them space. What do you want from me? Rhett asked quietly. I want you to believe we can win, or at least act like we can until we figure out how. And if we can't, then we lose together. But at least we tried. He looked at her like he was seeing someone new, not just the housekeeper who cooked and cleaned and kept things running, but someone who'd decided to stand beside him even when standing was the stupidest possible option. You're going to get us killed, he said. Maybe. Or maybe we'll surprise everyone, including ourselves. The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but something in that direction. All right, we'll try it your way, but when this blows up in our faces, then we'll deal with it, together. That night they sat around the kitchen table, all 4 of them, and actually talked. Not just logistics and chores and who was doing what, but strategy, plans, what they had, what they needed, what they were willing to risk. Cole admitted he was scared but tired of feeling helpless. Sam talked about other valleys he'd worked, places where people had banded together against outside threats, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes, they'd won. Rhett laid out their financial situation with brutal honesty. 3 months before they couldn't make payroll, maybe 6 before the bank foreclosed if things didn't turn around. And Eliza, who'd come to this place with nothing, found herself leading a discussion about resistance and community and hope in a world that seemed designed to crush all 3. We need the water back first, she said. Everything else depends on that. Agreed, Rhett said. But the diversion's on Boone's land now. He bought up the creek rights last year. Then we go at night, fix it without asking permission. That's trespassing. Could get us arrested, or worse. Could. But what's the alternative? They all knew what the alternative was. Death by inches, slow starvation of the ranch until there was nothing left to save. "I'll go," Sam said. "I'm the oldest. If someone's going to take the risk, we all go," Rhett interrupted. "All four of us. If we're doing this, we do it together." "Even me?" Cole asked, and there was something young and vulnerable in his voice that reminded Eliza he was barely past 20. "Especially you. You're part of this crew. Time you started acting like it." Cole sat up straighter, and Eliza saw pride replace some of the fear in his eyes. They made their plans quietly, speaking in low voices, even though there was no one to overhear. They'd go in 3 days, giving themselves time to scout the location and plan the best approach. They'd bring tools to break the dam and weapons in case they were caught. And they'd move fast, fix what needed fixing, and disappear before dawn. It was risky and probably stupid, but it was something. Action instead of waiting, fighting instead of surrendering. As the others left to get some sleep, Rhett lingered in the kitchen. Eliza was cleaning up, her hands moving through familiar motions while her mind raced ahead to everything that could go wrong. "Eliza." She turned to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For not giving up on this place. On me. For being stubborn enough to believe when believing makes no sense." He paused. "Sarah would have liked you. She was stubborn too." It was the kindest thing he'd said to her, and Eliza felt something warm unfurl in her chest. Not attraction exactly, though there was some of that if she was honest. More like recognition, connection, the sense that maybe, despite everything, she'd found where she belonged. "Get some rest," she said softly. "We've got work to do." "Yeah, we do." He left, and Eliza stood alone in the quiet kitchen, looking out at the dark land beyond the windows. 3 days until they risked everything. 3 days until they found out if courage and desperation were enough to turn the tide. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt alive in a way she hadn't since before her marriage, before the long slide into desperation and compromise. This place had demanded everything from her: her strength, her determination, her stubborn refusal to break. And somehow, impossibly, she'd found she had all of that and more to give. The wolves were circling, but Eliza Vance had learned how to bite back. 3 days. They'd make them count. The 3 days crawled by like wounded animals. Eliza threw herself into work with an intensity that left her exhausted by nightfall, but sleep came in fragments when it came at all. Every sound outside her window made her heart jump. Hoofbeats that turned out to be wind, voices that were only the creak of old wood settling. She kept expecting Boone's men to return, kept bracing for the next blow that would send everything tumbling down. But nothing happened. The silence felt worse than threats. On the second day, Sam rode out to scout the diversion site and came back with news that made Rhett's jaw tighten. "They're watching it. Got at least 2 men posted during daylight hours." "At night?" Rhett asked. Couldn't tell. Didn't want to get close enough to spook them. "So we're walking into a potential trap." "Maybe. Or maybe they figure no one's stupid enough to try anything." Cole laughed, sharp and nervous. "Well, they're about to find out how stupid we are." That evening, Eliza was kneading dough for the next day's bread when Rhett came into the kitchen. He moved quietly for such a big man, and she didn't notice him until he spoke. "You don't have to come tomorrow night." Her hand stilled in the flour. "We've been over this. I know what we said, but this is different from standing on a porch with a shotgun behind you. If we get caught out there, Boone's men won't just run us off. They'll—" He stopped, seemed to struggle with the words. "I don't want you hurt because of this. Because of me." Eliza turned to face him, her hands still covered in dough. "You think I'm doing this for you? Aren't you?" "I'm doing it because this is my home now, too. Because I'm tired of men like Boone taking things that don't belong to them. Because for once in my life, I want to fight back instead of just surviving." She met his eyes. "You don't get to protect me from my own choices, Rhett. Even if those choices get you killed? Even then." He stared at her, and she could see the war happening behind his eyes, the part of him that wanted to lock her in her room for her own safety, fighting against the part that knew she wouldn't stand for it. "You're the stubbornest woman I've ever met," he said finally. "Good. You need stubborn right now." What I need is... He stopped again, and something flickered across his face that looked almost like pain. Never mind. Just be ready by midnight. And Eliza? Yeah? Stay close to me out there, please. It wasn't an order. It was a request, maybe even a plea, and that made it harder to argue with. I will, she promised. The night of the mission arrived with a sky so full of stars it hurt to look at them. No moon, which was what they'd been hoping for, but the darkness felt oppressive rather than protective. Eliza dressed in her oldest clothes, dark, practical, already half ruined by ranch work. She braided her hair tight and tied it back, then stood in her small room trying to calm the hammering of her heart. This was insane. They were about to trespass on Boone's land, destroy his property, and hope they didn't get caught or killed in the process. Everything rational in her screamed to back out, to let Rhett and the others handle it, to protect herself the way she'd learned to do. But she'd meant what she said. She was done protecting herself by making herself small. They met in the yard just after midnight, 4 shadows moving quietly, checking equipment one last time. Shovels, pickaxes, rope, weapons. Rhett had his rifle. Sam had the shotgun. Cole carried a pistol that looked too big for his hand, and Eliza had a knife she hoped she wouldn't have to use. Remember, Rhett said quietly, his voice barely carrying in the still air. We move fast. We move quiet. If someone spots us, we run. No heroes, no last stands. We get out and we live to try again. Everyone clear? 3 nods in the darkness. All right then, let's go steal our water back. They moved out on foot, leaving the horses behind to avoid the noise. The land was treacherous in the dark. Loose rocks, hidden holes, branches that seemed to reach out deliberately to trip them. Eliza's eyes adjusted slowly, learning to read the different shades of black, finding her footing in the uncertain ground. It took nearly an hour to reach the creek, following it upstream toward the point where Sam had seen the diversion. The sound of water grew louder, then softer, then almost disappeared entirely. That's when they knew they were close. Rhett held up a hand and they all stopped, listening. Nothing but wind and the thin trickle of the creek, strangled by whatever Boone's men had built. No voices, no movement, no sign of guards. Too easy, Sam whispered. Maybe they figured no one would be dumb enough, Cole offered. Or maybe they're waiting for us to make the first move. Rhett studied the darkness ahead. Cole, you and Sam circle around. Make sure no one's hiding in the rocks. Eliza and I will check the dam itself. They split up, and suddenly Eliza was alone with Rhett in the dark, her heart so loud she was sure anyone within a mile could hear it. They crept forward, every step careful, until the diversion came into view. It wasn't sophisticated, just rocks and timber and mud, thrown together but effective enough to choke off most of the flow. A few hours of hard work would clear it, maybe less if they weren't trying to be quiet. But quiet was the whole point. If they could break it and disappear before anyone knew they were there. A sound cut through the night. Not close, but not far either. The strike of a match, the low murmur of voices. Rhett grabbed her arm and pulled her down behind a cluster of boulders. She could feel his tension, the coiled readiness for violence. They waited, barely breathing, as footsteps approached. 2 men emerged from the shadows, both carrying rifles, both moving with the casual confidence of people who didn't expect trouble. They stopped maybe 20 feet from where Eliza and Rhett were hiding. I still say this is a waste of time, one of them said, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. Calder ain't stupid enough to try anything. Boone thinks he might be, and when Boone says watch something, we watch it. The second man sounded bored. Besides, we're getting paid either way. Yeah, but I'm missing a perfectly good poker game for this. How much longer are we supposed to... The shotgun blast split the night like the end of the world. Both guards spun toward the sound, and in that moment, Rhett moved. He came up from behind the boulder fast and silent, his rifle raised, and his voice cut through the chaos. Drop your weapons. Now! The guards froze, caught between the threat in front of them and whatever was happening behind them. For a stretched second, nobody moved. Then one of them, the younger one, the one who'd been complaining, started to raise his rifle. Don't, Rhett said, and there was something in his voice that made even Eliza's blood run cold. I don't want to kill you, but I will if you make me. There's 2 of us and 1 of you, the guard said, but his voice shook. You sure about that? Eliza stepped out from behind the boulder, her hand shaking so badly she had to grip the knife handle with both hands to keep it steady. She had no idea what she was going to do with it. She'd never hurt anyone in her life, but the guards didn't know that. The older guard lowered his rifle slowly. Easy now, no need for anyone to get hurt. Then put your weapons down and walk away. Can't do that? Boon'll... Another shot rang out, closer this time, and suddenly Sam was there, appearing from the darkness like a ghost. We got problems. More men coming up from the south. At least 4, maybe more. How long? Rhett asked. 5 minutes. Maybe less. Rhett cursed, creative and vicious. Cole? Here! Cole emerged from the other direction, breathing hard. I fired that first shot. Sorry, I thought I saw... There were more guards than we thought. This whole place is crawling with them. It's a trap, Eliza said, and the certainty of it hit her like a physical blow. They knew we'd come. They've been waiting. The older guard smiled slightly. Boone ain't dumb. You make noise in town, ask questions, poke around. You think he wouldn't figure out your next move? We need to leave, Sam said urgently. Now. But Rhett was looking at the dam, at the water being choked off, at everything they'd come here to fix. We can break it. 2 minutes, maybe 3. We don't have 3 minutes. Then make the time. It was the stupidest decision possible, and they all knew it. But Rhett was already moving toward the dam, and after a frozen moment of disbelief, the others followed. The guards made a move to stop them and found Sam's shotgun in their faces. Don't, Sam said simply. Sit down, stay quiet, and you might live through this. They sat. Eliza grabbed a shovel and started tearing at the dam, her muscles screaming protest, but her mind focused on nothing except removing rocks, breaking timber, opening the flow. Beside her, Rhett swung a pickaxe with brutal efficiency. Cole attacked from the other side, and slowly, agonizingly, the dam started to give. Water began to seep through, then flow, then pour. The sound was beautiful and terrifying, a rush of liberation that would also mark their position to anyone listening. That's good enough, Sam called. We need to move. Not yet. Now, Rhett. I can see their torches. Eliza looked up and felt her stomach drop. Lights were converging on their position from multiple directions, moving fast. Too fast. They'd never make it back to the ranch. Not on foot. Not in the dark with armed men hunting them. The canyon, Cole said suddenly. There's a canyon half a mile west. We can lose them in there. Or get trapped, Sam countered. You got a better idea? No one did. They ran. The land fought them every step, and behind them the shouts were getting closer, the lights brighter. Eliza's lungs burned. Her legs felt like they might give out, but she kept moving because stopping meant capture, and capture meant whatever Boone decided it meant. Rhett stayed beside her, matching her pace even though he could have run faster. Once, when she stumbled, his hand shot out to steady her, and she felt the strength in that grip, the absolute determination that she would not fall. The canyon opened before them like a mouth, dark and hungry. They plunged into it without hesitation, the walls rising on either side, the path narrowing to barely shoulder width in places. Behind them, the voices echoed strangely, distorted by the rock, making it impossible to tell how close pursuit was. Keep going, Rhett urged. There's a split up ahead. We go right, they might go left. They reached the fork and veered right, pressing themselves against the canyon wall as the sounds of their pursuers filled the narrow space. Footsteps, curses, someone barking orders. The light swept past the opening they'd taken, and for a moment Eliza thought they might actually... There! I saw movement! The chase was on again, and now the canyon was working against them, limiting their options, funneling them forward with nowhere to go but deeper. The path twisted and turned, sometimes widening, sometimes so narrow they had to go single file. Once, Eliza's shoulder scraped rock and she felt cloth tear, skin break, but there was no time to care about that. Then, impossibly, they burst out of the canyon into an open space, not large but enough to breathe, enough to think. Rhett spun, assessing their surroundings with the practiced eye of someone who'd fought before. Up there. He pointed to a jumble of boulders that formed a natural barrier. We can defend that position if we have to. If we have to? Cole's voice cracked. We're outnumbered 10-1. Then we make ourselves hard to kill. Rhett was already moving, choosing positions, checking sightlines. Sam, you take the left approach. Cole, the right. Eliza, you stay behind those rocks in the center. Don't come out unless I tell you to. I can fight. You can survive. That's the job right now. There was no time to argue. The voices were getting closer, the lights appearing at the canyon mouth like angry fireflies. Eliza crouched behind the rocks Rhett had indicated, her knife gripped in white-knuckled hands, her breath coming in gasps that sounded too loud. The first of Boone's men emerged from the canyon, and Rhett's voice rang out across the clearing. That's far enough. The men stopped, and in the starlight, Eliza could see there were at least 8 of them, maybe more behind. They fanned out, weapons ready, looking like they'd done this before. Calder. One of them stepped forward, older than the others, with a voice that carried authority. Boone wants you alive. Come peaceful, and we'll let the others go. That's a lie, and you know it. Maybe. But it's the best offer you're going to get. You destroyed his property, trespassed on his land. He's got every right to... He's got no rights. That creek runs through my land first. It's mine. Was yours. Boone owns the water rights now, but bought them legal. Legal don't make it right. The man sighed like this was all very tedious. We can do this the hard way if you want, but there's 8 of us and 4 of you, and we've got you pinned in. You do the math. Rhett didn't respond immediately, and Eliza could practically hear him calculating odds, weighing options, trying to find a way out that didn't end with someone dead. Let the woman go, he said finally. She's not part of this. She destroyed Boone's property same as you. She's part of it. The man paused. Tell you what, though. You come down, surrender peaceful, and we'll make sure she gets to town safe. That's the best deal you're going to get. Don't, Eliza hissed from her hiding spot. Don't you dare! She ain't going nowhere without me, Sam called out. None of us are. Yeah, Cole added, his voice steadier than it had been. What he said? The man shook his head. Loyal. That's admirable. Also stupid. Last chance, Calder. Come peaceful or we come get you. Then come get me. For a handful of heartbeats, nobody moved. Then, like a storm breaking, everything happened at once. The men charged forward and gunfire erupted, deafening in the enclosed space. Eliza pressed herself flat behind the rocks, her ears ringing, her heart trying to break through her ribs. She could hear Sam's shotgun booming, Cole's pistol cracking, Rhett's rifle report steady and precise. But they were outnumbered and outgunned, and everyone knew it. Something ricocheted off the rock above her head, and she screamed before she could stop herself. Instantly, Rhett was there, dropping down beside her, his face streaked with dirt and something darker. You hit? No, Stay down. No matter what happens, you stay down. Rhett. But he was already gone, back to his position, firing again. The smell of gunpowder was choking, and through the haze, Eliza could see that Boone's men had taken cover, settling in for a siege. They didn't need to rush. They just needed to wait. We're pinned, Cole shouted. I noticed. Rhett fired again. Sam, how's your ammunition? Getting low. This was how it ended. Trapped in a canyon, outnumbered, outgunned, with nowhere to run and no reinforcements coming. Eliza felt a strange calm settle over her. After everything, after years of survival, of compromise, of making herself small to avoid being crushed, this was how it finished. Fighting for something that mattered, surrounded by people who'd become something like family. There were worse ways to go. Then, cutting through the chaos, came a sound that didn't belong. Hoofbeats. A lot of them, coming fast. Boone's men heard it too. The gunfire slackened, uncertainty rippling through their ranks. The man in charge, the one who'd tried to negotiate, stood up slightly, trying to see what was coming. What the? The horses burst into the clearing from the opposite canyon mouth, and for a confused moment, Eliza couldn't understand what she was seeing. Too many riders, coming too fast, and they weren't shooting at the defenders. They were shooting at Boone's men. Hold fire, someone shouted. Hold fire, it's Morrison! And Fletcher's son! Hold your fire! The battle dissolved into chaos and confusion. Boone's men tried to regroup, found themselves caught between two forces, and made the smart choice. They ran, disappearing back into the canyon they'd come from, their retreat covered by sporadic gunfire that hit nothing. And then, impossibly, it was over. The new arrivals dismounted, and in the starlight, Eliza recognized faces from town. The blacksmith's apprentice, one of the ranch hands from the Morrison place, even Amos Fletcher's oldest boy. Maybe a dozen men total, all armed, all looking like they couldn't quite believe what they'd just done. Rhett stood slowly, his rifle still raised, looking at them like they might be a hallucination. "What? How?" "Martha sent word," the Morrison hand said. He was young, barely older than Cole, with scared eyes and steady hands. "Said you were making a move tonight. Said if Boone came down on you, maybe it was time we all came down on Boone." "We didn't know if we'd make it in time," Amos's son added. "Pa said I was crazy for coming, but—" He shrugged. "Guess I'm crazy then." Eliza emerged from behind the rocks, her legs shaking so badly she could barely stand. Rhett was there immediately, his arm around her waist, holding her up. "You came," she said stupidly. "You actually came." "You asked us to," the Morrison hand said simply. "Figured it was time someone did." Sam had slumped against a boulder, looking 20 years older and utterly exhausted. Cole was checking his pistol with shaking hands, probably realizing for the first time how close they'd all come to dying. And Rhett just stood there, holding Eliza up, staring at the men who'd saved them like he was trying to solve an impossible equation. "Why?" he asked finally. "Because we're tired," one of the men said. Another nod of agreement. "Tired of being scared, tired of watching Boone take what ain't his, tired of living like cowards." He met Rhett's eyes. "You stood up, figured it was time we did too." "This isn't over," Rhett said quietly. "Boone won't forget this. Any of this." "No, he won't." The Morrison hand checked his rifle. "But maybe now he knows he can't just do whatever he wants. Maybe that's worth something." They rode back to the ranch in a group, strength in numbers that felt both comforting and fragile. The sky was starting to lighten by the time they arrived, dawn breaking over land that looked different somehow, like it had seen something change in the night and was still deciding what that meant. Eliza made coffee for everyone because that's what you did. You fed people. You gave them comfort. You found normal things in the middle of chaos. The men gathered in the yard, talking in low voices, planning next steps, already organizing themselves into something that looked like resistance. Rhett found her in the kitchen, alone for the first time since the fight. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there looking at her like he was trying to memorize something he might lose. "You were right," he said finally. "About what?" "About not giving up. About believing we could win. About all of it." He took a breath. "I thought I was done. After Sarah died, I thought the best I could hope for was holding on until the end, but you—" He stopped, started again. "You made me remember what it feels like to fight for something, not just against something, but for it." "Rhett, let me finish, please." He moved closer, and she could see exhaustion and hope warring in his face. "I don't know what happens next. Boone's going to come back harder, and we're still barely holding on, and everything could still fall apart. But for the first time in 3 years, I think maybe it won't. Maybe we've got a chance." He reached out, hesitated, then took her hand. "And that's because of you." Eliza felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back furiously. She'd cried enough in her life. Right now she wanted to feel strong. "We did it together," she said. "All of us." "Yeah, we did." He smiled, slight and unexpected. "You're not leaving, are you?" "Not a chance." "Good, because I think we're going to need you before this is over." Outside, the sun continued its rise, and in the yard, men who'd been strangers were becoming allies, united by one desperate fight and the hope that it might lead to something bigger. The creek was running again, water flowing where it belonged, and even though the war was far from won, they'd claimed one small victory. Eliza squeezed Rhett's hand once, then let go and went back to making coffee. There would be time later for whatever this thing between them was becoming. Right now, there was work to do. There was always work to do. But for the first time since arriving at this brutal, beautiful place, the work felt like building something instead of just surviving. And that made all the difference. The victory lasted exactly 3 days before Boone made his next move. Eliza was hanging laundry when she saw the dust cloud rising from the direction of town. Too much dust for a single rider, too fast for a wagon. She dropped the sheet she'd been pinning and ran for the house, her wet hands leaving dark prints on her skirt. "Rhett!" He was already coming out, rifle in hand, his face set in grim lines. Sam and Cole emerged from the barn, and the Morrison boy, Jacob, his name was, appeared from where he'd been mending fence. He'd stayed on after the fight, along with two others who had nowhere else pressing to be, and figured the ranch needed extra hands. The riders came into view, and Eliza's stomach dropped. At least 20 men, all armed, moving with military precision. At their head rode Silas Boone himself, and beside him was a man wearing a tin star that caught the morning sun. "That's Sheriff Tucker," Sam said quietly. "This ain't a social call." They formed a line in the yard, the 6 of them against 20, and waited. Eliza's mouth had gone dry, but she forced herself to stand tall, to not show the fear crawling up her spine like spiders. Boone pulled his horse to a stop just outside what might be considered a respectful distance. His smile was all courtesy and zero warmth. "Morning, Calder. Hope we're not disturbing." "What do you want, Boone?" "Just a friendly visit. Sheriff Tucker here has some questions about an incident a few nights back. Trespassing, destruction of property, assault on my men." Boone's smile widened. "You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" The sheriff shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. He was a heavy-set man in his 50s, with the look of someone who'd rather be anywhere else but had learned not to say so. "Mr. Calder, I need to ask you straight. Were you or any of your people on Mr. Boone's land 3 nights ago?" "That creek runs through my property," Rhett said evenly. "March feet. Rhett Geet. Water rights or not, diverting it was an act of aggression. I had every right to—" "That's not what I asked. Were you on his land, yes or no?" The silence stretched. Finally, Rhett nodded. "I was." "And you destroyed the water diversion he'd legally constructed?" "I restored the natural flow of water that feeds my ranch. If his illegal dam got damaged in the process—" "Illegal?" Boone laughed, sharp and ugly. "Sheriff, show him the paperwork." Tucker pulled out a folded document, looking like he wished it would catch fire. "Water rights were legally transferred to Mr. Boone last year. He had every right to build that diversion. You had no right to tear it down." "He's strangling my ranch." "That's a civil matter. What you did is criminal trespass and destruction of property." Tucker wouldn't meet Rhett's eyes. "I'm going to need you to come with me. We'll sort this out in town, proper-like." "No." The word came from Eliza before she could stop it. All eyes swung to her, and she felt the weight of Boone's attention like a physical pressure. But she'd started, so she might as well finish. "This is wrong, and you know it, Sheriff. Boone's been pushing people out, buying up land through intimidation and threats. He diverted that creek knowing it would kill this ranch. That's not legal. That's theft dressed up in paperwork." "Miss, I appreciate your passion, but my name is Eliza Vance, and I'm not a miss who needs to be patronized. I'm a witness to what happened, and I'm telling you that if you arrest Rhett Calder, you're doing Boone's dirty work for him." Boone's expression had gone cold. "That's a serious accusation, woman. Careful you don't say something you'll regret." "Is that a threat?" "It's a warning. False allegations against a law-abiding citizen can have consequences. So can buying off lawmen and using legal documents as weapons." The sheriff's face reddened. "Now hold on. She's right though, ain't she?" Jacob Morrison stepped forward, his young face set with determination. "My pa lost his ranch because of Boone's legal maneuvering. Convenient how the bank suddenly wanted their money right after his cattle got sick. Even more convenient how Boone had cash ready to buy it. Your father couldn't manage his finances." "That's not my fault," Boone said smoothly. "And I suppose it ain't your fault his prize bull died, or that his well got fouled, or that 3 of his hands quit the same week, all getting better offers from you. If you're accusing me of something, say it plain. I'm saying you're a snake who's been poisoning this valley for years, and we're done letting you." More riders were approaching now, and Eliza's heart lifted despite the situation. Martha from the saloon, riding astride like she'd done it all her life. Amos Fletcher and 2 of his boys. The blacksmith still wearing his leather apron. Others she recognized from town, from neighboring ranches, from that desperate fight in the canyon. They formed up behind Rhett's small group, and suddenly the numbers didn't look quite so lopsided. "Well now," Martha said, her voice carrying authority that made men twice her size pay attention. Looks like quite a party. Sheriff Tucker, you arresting people for defending their property now? Martha, this ain't your concern. Everything in this valley is my concern. I live here, work here, and I'm tired of watching Boone play kingmaker while you look the other way. Tucker's face had gone from red to pale. I'm just enforcing the law. Whose law? The one written in statute books, or the one Boone pays you to enforce? That's enough. Tucker's hand moved toward his gun, then stopped as he realized how many people were watching, how many witnesses there would be to whatever happened next. I could arrest all of you for interfering with what? Justice? Amos Fletcher spat the word. We've watched you turn a blind eye while Boone's men terrorize this valley. Watched you ignore complaints, lose paperwork, suddenly be somewhere else when people needed help. You ain't enforcing law. You're enabling tyranny. Boone had stopped smiling. His hand rested casually near his own weapon, and his men had spread out slightly, creating fields of fire. The situation was balanced on a knife's edge, one wrong word away from bloodshed. This is your last chance, Boone said quietly, but his voice carried. Calder, you come with the sheriff now. Answer for what you did, and we'll handle this through proper channels. Otherwise, he gestured at the assembled crowd. Otherwise, you're making this into something bigger than it needs to be, something people might get hurt over. You mean you'll hurt them, Rhett said. I mean accidents happen. People get careless. Buildings catch fire. Loved ones get sick. Boone's smile returned, sharp as a blade. Would be a shame if all these good citizens suffered because one stubborn rancher couldn't see reason. The threat hung in the air, poison sweet and unmistakable. Eliza saw Rhett's hand tighten on his rifle, saw the calculation in his eyes. He was weighing the cost of resistance against the price of surrender, and she knew with sick certainty that he was about to give himself up to protect everyone else. No, she said again, louder this time. We're not doing this. We're not letting you win because you're good at making threats. Eliza, Rhett started. He's bluffing. He has to be. There's too many of us now, too many witnesses. He can't just... The shot came from somewhere in Boone's group, a crack that split the morning like lightning. The bullet hit the ground 2 feet from Eliza's position, kicking up dust and making everyone flinch. Next one goes higher, Boone said conversationally. Just so we're clear on whether I'm bluffing. Eliza's ears were ringing, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her chest, but she didn't move, didn't back down, just stared at Boone with every ounce of hatred she could muster. You just shot at an unarmed woman in front of a sheriff, Martha said, her voice deadly quiet. That's attempted murder, last I checked. I didn't shoot anyone. One of my men got nervous, finger slipped. Ain't that right, Sheriff? Tucker looked like he wanted to sink into the ground. Say it, Martha demanded. Say you'll arrest whoever fired that shot. Say the law matters here. But Tucker stayed silent, and his silence said everything. Amos Fletcher drew his pistol, the movement slow and deliberate. Seems like the law ain't working proper. Maybe we need to handle this ourselves. You pull that trigger, you'll start a war, Boone warned. Maybe we're already in one. We just didn't realize it until now. More weapons appeared on both sides. The air felt electric, charged with violence waiting to happen. Eliza found herself thinking with strange clarity that this was how things ended, not with dramatic confrontations or heroic stands, but with a bunch of scared, angry people pointing guns at each other because nobody knew how to back down. Then a new voice cut through the tension. Everyone lower your weapons, now! A single rider emerged from the direction of town, moving at a measured pace that suggested either incredible courage or complete foolishness. He was young, maybe 30, dressed like a city lawyer, but riding like he'd grown up in the saddle. He had the kind of face that inspired trust without trying, and he carried himself with authority that had nothing to do with weapons. Who the hell are you? Boone demanded. Daniel Ashford. I'm a federal land agent sent to investigate irregularities in water rights transfers in this territory. He pulled out credentials, held them up. And from what I'm seeing, there's plenty to investigate. The change in Boone's expression was minute but unmistakable, surprise giving way to barely controlled rage. This is a local matter. You've got no jurisdiction. Actually, I've got jurisdiction over any land transaction involving territorial resources. Water rights fall under that mandate. Ashford dismounted, completely ignoring the armed men surrounding him. Sheriff Tucker, I'm going to need to see all documentation related to the water rights transfers in this valley. Deeds, surveys, payment records, everything. I don't have all that here. Then we'll ride back to town and you'll produce it, along with any complaints filed against Mr. Boone or his operations in the last 5 years. Now hold on, Boone interjected. You can't just ride in here and— I can, actually. It's my job. And given that I've just witnessed an unprovoked shooting at an unarmed civilian, I'm inclined to expand my investigation to include Sheriff Tucker's performance of duty. Ashford turned to look at the assembled crowd. Anyone here who has complaints about improper land transfers, water rights violations, or intimidation tactics, I'll be taking statements starting this afternoon. In town, at the hotel, where everyone can see that we're following proper procedure. The silence that followed was different from before, not charged with violence, but with possibility. Hope, even, though Eliza was almost afraid to feel it. This is convenient timing, Boone said, his voice dripping suspicion. Federal agent shows up right when someone in Washington started asking questions about why so much territorial land is ending up in single ownership despite regulations against it. Yes, very convenient. Ashford's smile was pleasant and absolutely merciless, almost like someone sent a detailed letter outlining concerns about improper practices in this valley. Multiple letters, actually from multiple sources. Who sent letters? Rhett asked, sounding as confused as Eliza felt. I did. Martha raised her hand slightly. After that night in the canyon, figured it was time someone with actual authority knew what was happening out here. Wrote to every territorial office I could find addresses for. I sent one too, Amos admitted, to the land office. Detailed all the suspicious purchases, the timing of them, the circumstances. And I may have mentioned something in correspondence with my brother, who works in the territorial government, another rancher added. Didn't think it'd amount to anything, but it amounted to me, Ashford said. And now that I'm here, we're going to sort this out properly. Through law and documentation and process, not threats and gunfire. He looked at Boone. Unless you'd prefer to continue this confrontation, I'd be happy to add armed intimidation of federal agent to my report. Boone's jaw worked silently, and Eliza could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Whatever power he wielded locally, it didn't extend to federal charges. If he pushed this now, with witnesses and an actual authority figure present, he'd risk everything he'd built. This isn't over, he said finally. No, it's not. But it's going to be handled legally from here on out. I suggest you get yourself a good lawyer, Mr. Boone. You're going to need one. Ashford turned to Tucker. Sheriff, escort Mr. Boone and his men back to town. Make sure they understand that any retaliatory action against anyone here will be considered obstruction of a federal investigation. Tucker looked relieved to finally have clear orders. Yes, sir. Boone, you heard the man. Let's go. This is a mistake, Boone said, but he was already turning his horse. All of you are making a mistake. Wouldn't be the first time, Martha called after him. Probably won't be the last. They rode out, and the tension drained so suddenly that Eliza felt her knees wobble. She sat down hard in the dust, her whole body shaking with delayed shock. Rhett was beside her immediately, his hand on her shoulder. You all right? I think so. She laughed, slightly hysterical. He shot at me. He actually shot at me. I know. I'm sorry. I should have— Should have what? Given yourself up? Let him win? She grabbed his hand, squeezed hard. No, we did the right thing. We stood our ground. Ashford approached, offering her a hand up. She took it gratefully, brushing dust from her skirt with hands that still shook. Thank you, she managed. Your timing was— Cutting it close, I know. I was actually supposed to arrive yesterday, but there was an issue with a wheel on the stage. Probably not coincidence in retrospect. He looked at the assembled group. I'm serious about those statements. I need documentation of everything Boone's done. Dates, witnesses, any physical evidence you have. The more thorough we are, the better chance we have of making something stick. You think you can actually stop him? Jacob asked, voicing what they were all thinking. Man like Boone, he's got money, influence. He's got practices that violate federal land policy. If I can prove he's been systematically forcing people off their land to accumulate holdings beyond legal limits, he'll face serious consequences. Might even lose everything he's taken. Ashford's expression sobered. But it won't be easy. He'll fight this with every resource he has. You need to be prepared for that. We've been fighting him all along, Sam said. At least now we've got someone fighting with us who knows how the legal system works. That's the hope. Ashford pulled out a notebook. Start with the creek diversion. I'll need to see the site, get measurements, verify that the original water flow was substantially altered. Then we'll work backward through every transaction, every transfer, every convenient accident or timely foreclosure. The next several hours were a blur of activity. Ashford proved to be thorough to the point of obsession, documenting everything, interviewing anyone who'd had dealings with Boone, making notes in handwriting so small and precise it made Eliza's eyes hurt to look at it. People came and went throughout the day, adding their stories to the growing pile of evidence. The rancher who'd lost half his herd to mysterious illness right before Boone offered to buy at rock-bottom prices. The widow whose bank loan had been called in immediately after she refused Boone's advances. The farmer who'd found his irrigation channels destroyed 3 times in as many weeks until he finally gave up and sold. Each story was a small tragedy, and together they painted a picture of systematic intimidation and abuse that made Eliza's blood boil. By evening, Ashford had filled 2 notebooks and looked grimly satisfied. "This is good," he said, closing the second book. "This is enough to start formal proceedings. It'll take time, months probably. But if everything you've told me holds up under scrutiny, Boone's finished." "And in the meantime," Rhett asked, "while you're filing papers and conducting investigations, what's to stop him from retaliating?" "Me. I'm authorized to issue injunctions preventing further land acquisitions or water rights transfers. I can also request federal marshals be sent if there's evidence of ongoing intimidation." Ashford met Rhett's eyes. "But I won't lie to you, the system moves slowly, and desperate men do desperate things. So we need to be ready. You need to be careful, document everything, don't give him any excuse to claim you're the aggressors. And," he hesitated, "maybe consider that standing your ground isn't always the smartest option. Sometimes survival means knowing when to retreat." "I've spent 3 years retreating," Rhett said quietly. "From grief, from life, from anything that might hurt. I'm done with that." Ashford nodded slowly. "Just make sure standing your ground doesn't turn into a grave to stand on." After he left for town, taking statements and promises to return soon, the ranch felt different, quieter maybe, or just exhausted. The people who'd stood with them throughout the day began drifting away, back to their own lives and responsibilities, but not before extracting promises to stay in touch, to support each other, to not let Boone divide them again. Eliza made supper mechanically, her mind only half on the task. She kept seeing that moment when the bullet kicked up dust near her feet, kept feeling the certainty that the next shot would be higher, would find flesh instead of dirt. She'd faced down death before in slower, quieter ways, starvation, cold, despair. But never like that. Never so immediate and violent. "You're shaking." She looked down and saw Rhett was right. Her hands trembled as she tried to cut vegetables, the knife wavering dangerously. "I'm fine." "You're not." He took the knife gently from her hands and set it aside. "It's all right to be scared after something like that." "I'm not scared. I'm angry." She realized it was true as she said it. "He shot at me because I wouldn't shut up, because I dared to challenge him. And he knew that nothing would happen to him because he owns the sheriff and half the valley besides." "But something did happen. Ashford showed up. People stood together. We won. For now. But Ashford's right. Boone's not done. He'll come back harder, and next time—" She couldn't finish the thought. "Next time we'll be ready." Rhett turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. "Listen to me. Today you stood in front of armed men and refused to back down. You faced someone who wanted you scared and you looked him in the eye. That took more courage than anything I've done. That was stupid, not courageous. Sometimes they're the same thing." He smiled slightly. "And sometimes stupid courage is exactly what's needed to change things." She wanted to believe him, wanted to think that their ragtag resistance actually stood a chance against Boone's money and influence, but she'd been disappointed by hope too many times. "What if we lose?" she asked quietly. "What if Ashford can't make the charges stick, or Boone finds a way around them, or—" Then we lose. But at least we'll lose fighting. He pulled her closer, and she let herself lean into him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. I know you've been hurt before. Know you've learned not to trust good things because they usually turn bad. But Eliza, he tilted her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. Sometimes good things are real, sometimes they last, and sometimes the only way to find out is to believe in them anyway. She wanted to kiss him. The urge was sudden and startling, and she almost acted on it before reality reasserted itself. This wasn't the time. They were both running on fear and adrenaline, and anything that happened now would be born from crisis rather than genuine feeling. But the wanting was real. That was new. Come on, she said, pulling away before she did something they'd both regret. Let's finish supper. Everyone's hungry, and standing around philosophizing won't feed them. They worked together in comfortable silence, and gradually the shaking in Eliza's hands subsided. The routine of cooking, the familiar motions, helped ground her. This was real. This work, this place, these people who'd become something like family. Whatever happened tomorrow or next week or next month, she had this moment. It would have to be enough. Supper was subdued, everyone too exhausted for much conversation. They ate and dispersed to various corners of the ranch, seeking rest or solitude or just the comfort of familiar tasks. Cole surprised everyone by volunteering to take first watch, his earlier fear replaced by something harder and more determined. I'll spell you in 4 hours, Sam promised. Make it 6. I won't sleep anyway. After cleanup, Eliza found herself alone in the kitchen, staring out the window at darkness that felt less hostile than it had weeks ago. The land was still brutal, still unforgiving, but it was home now, her home. Worth defending, worth dying for if it came to that. She pushed the thought away and went upstairs, but sleep was elusive. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Boone's smile, heard the crack of that gunshot, felt the certainty that everything they'd built was fragile as glass. Sometime near midnight, she gave up and went back downstairs, thinking maybe warm milk would help. She found Rhett at the kitchen table, paperwork spread out before him, his face drawn with exhaustion. Couldn't sleep either? She asked. Too much to think about. He gestured at the papers. Trying to figure out how bad our financial situation really is. Spoiler, it's bad. How bad? 2 months, maybe 3, before we can't make payroll. Another month after that before the bank starts making noises about foreclosure. He rubbed his eyes. Even if Ashford stops Boone from expanding, if we can't turn a profit soon, none of this will matter. Eliza sat down across from him, studying the numbers that meant survival or ruin. What about the cattle? Could we sell some early? Market's flooded right now. We'd lose money. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Sarah always said the ranch would provide if we worked hard enough. But I'm starting to think hard work isn't enough. Maybe it never was. So we work smarter. Eliza pulled the papers toward her, scanning the columns of numbers. What if we diversified? The garden's producing now. We could sell vegetables in town. Maybe eggs, if we got chickens. Small income, but steady. That's pocket change against what we owe. Pocket change adds up, and it's better than nothing. She met his eyes. You said yourself we need to believe good things can last. That includes believing we can make this work. He studied her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. When did you get so stubborn? I was always stubborn. You just didn't notice because I was busy surviving. She smiled slightly. But surviving and living are different things. I'm ready to try living again. Even here? Even with everything that's happening? Especially here. Especially now. She reached across and took his hand. I'm not leaving, Rhett. Not unless you throw me out. And maybe not even then. His grip tightened, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Not desire exactly, though there was some of that. More like recognition, understanding, the acknowledgement that they'd both been broken by life and were choosing, despite everything, to try being whole again. I won't throw you out, he said quietly. Ever. This is your home as much as it's mine. More, maybe. You fought for it harder than I did. We fought for it together. Yeah, we did. They sat there in the quiet kitchen, hands linked across papers that predicted ruin, and for just a moment Eliza let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, things could actually work out. That hope wasn't always a prelude to disappointment. That standing your ground could lead to something more than defeat. Outside, The land stretched dark and endless under stars that had watched human struggle for longer than history remembered. The ranch was small against that vastness, fragile, insignificant, but it was theirs. And they'd be damned if they'd give it up without exhausting every option first, even the impossible ones. The quiet lasted 6 days. 6 days of nervous peace where everyone jumped at shadows and watched the road like it might birth monsters at any moment. Ashford had set up operations in town, interviewing witnesses, reviewing documents, building his case with methodical precision. Word filtered back that Boone had lawyered up, brought in someone from back east, expensive and mean, but that the federal agent wasn't backing down. The valley held its breath and waited. Eliza used the time to push forward with her plan for diversifying the ranch's income. She expanded the garden, recruited Martha and 2 other women from town to help process vegetables for sale, started negotiations with Amos about regular deliveries to the general store. It was small money, like Rhett had said, but it was something. Movement in the right direction. On the 7th day, everything changed. Eliza was in the garden, her hands deep in soil that was finally starting to cooperate, when she heard the child crying. The sound was thin and desperate, carried on wind that had turned cold overnight, promising winter wasn't far off. She stood, wiping her hands on her apron, trying to locate the source. The crying came again, closer now, and then she saw movement near the barn, something small and stumbling, moving like every step cost more than it had to give. "Rhett!" She was already running. "Rhett! There's a—" The child collapsed before she reached it. Boy, she realized as she dropped to her knees beside him, maybe 8 or 9 years old, dressed in clothes that had been decent once, but were now torn and filthy. His face was fever-bright, his breathing shallow and rapid. "Hey," she said gently, touching his forehead and feeling heat that made her stomach drop. "Hey, you're safe now. What's your name?" His eyes fluttered open, brown, terrified, confused. "Mama," he whispered. "I need Mama." Then Rhett was there, Sam and Cole right behind him, all of them staring at this small, broken thing that had somehow found its way to them. "Where'd he come from?" Sam asked. "I don't know, he appeared." Eliza looked up at Rhett. "We need to get him inside, he's burning up." Rhett scooped the boy up like he weighed nothing, and they rushed him into the house. Eliza cleared the kitchen table and they laid him on it, and she tried not to think about how small he looked, how fragile, how wrong it was for someone so young to be this hurt. "Get water," she ordered, "and blankets. Cole, ride to town. Get the doctor. Tell him it's urgent." "Doc Mitchell's 2 days away visiting his sister," Cole said. "Everyone knows that." "Then get Ashford. Get anyone who might be able to help. Go!" Cole went, and Eliza focused on the boy, stripping away his ruined shirt, finding bruises and cuts that made her hands shake with rage. Someone had hurt this child, recently, deliberately. "Who did this to you?" she asked softly, but the boy was beyond answering, lost in fever dreams that made him cry out and thrash weakly. They spent the next hour trying to bring the fever down, bathing him in cool water, forcing small sips of liquid past cracked lips. Eliza found herself praying to something she didn't believe in anymore, bargaining with a universe that had never shown interest in her deals before. Just let him live. Just this one thing. When Ashford arrived with Cole and the town's midwife, a stern woman named Agnes who knew more about healing than most doctors, the boy's fever had broken slightly, but he still hadn't truly regained consciousness. Agnes examined him with efficient hands, her face growing darker with each discovery. Dehydration, exposure, infection in at least 2 of these cuts. He's been wandering for days, maybe longer. She looked at Eliza. "You did good getting his temperature down. Probably saved his life." "Who is he?" Ashford asked. "Anyone recognize him?" They all shook their heads. The boy's features were ordinary enough, brown hair, brown eyes, nothing distinctive. He could have been from any of 100 families in the territory. "We need to find out where he came from," Agnes said, "and why he's here. But right now he needs rest and medicine. I'll stay with him, but someone needs to ride to the Morrison place. They've got willow bark and other supplies I'll need." "I'll go," Jacob volunteered. He'd become a fixture at the ranch, quiet and hard-working, and Eliza had grown to depend on his steady presence. As the day wore into evening, they took turns watching the boy. He woke briefly once, confused and frightened, calling for his mother in a voice that broke Eliza's heart. She held his hand and promised him he was safe, promised they'd find his family, promised things she had no way of guaranteeing. "You're good with him," Rhett said quietly. They were alone in the kitchen, Agnes having taken over bedside duty, while Eliza made food that nobody had much appetite for. "I don't feel good with him. I feel helpless." She stared at her hands, still seeing bruises on skin too young to carry them. "Someone did this to him, Rhett. Someone hurt a child and then, what, let him wander into the wilderness to die? Maybe he ran away. From what? Who beats a kid that badly and expects them to stay?" Rhett had no answer for that, and they worked in heavy silence until Agnes emerged, her expression troubled. "He's stable for now, but I'm worried about infection. Those cuts should have been treated days ago." She accepted the coffee Eliza offered. "He said something while he was half awake, kept repeating a name, Boone. Think he might be connected to all this somehow?" The name hit like a physical blow. Eliza and Rhett exchanged glances, and she could see her own dread reflected in his eyes. "What exactly did he say?" Ashford asked. He'd stayed, claiming he wanted to ask the boy questions when he was lucid, but Eliza suspected it was more than professional interest. The agent had a decent streak that ran deeper than his federal authority. Just the name, over and over, and something about his mama being taken. Agnes shook her head. "Poor thing's traumatized. Whatever happened, it wasn't good." They bedded down for the night in shifts, someone always watching the boy, everyone else sleeping light and armed. Eliza dozed in a chair near the kitchen stove, starting awake at every sound, unable to shake the feeling that something worse was coming. She was right. The attack came just before dawn, when the sky was that uncertain gray that was neither night nor day. Eliza woke to the sound of breaking glass and Cole shouting, and then she was on her feet, heart hammering, trying to make sense of chaos. Men were surrounding the house. She could see them through the windows, dark shapes moving with purpose. Someone was hammering on the door, and a voice she recognized as one of Boone's men was shouting demands. "Send out the boy! Send him out now, and nobody gets hurt!" Rhett appeared from upstairs, rifle in hand, his face set in lines that promised violence. Sam was already at a window, shotgun ready. Jacob had positioned himself near the back door, and even Agnes had armed herself with a kitchen knife, standing protectively near the room where the boy still slept. "How many?" Rhett asked. "At least 10, Sam reported. "Maybe more. They've got the house surrounded." "We could fight," Cole said, but his voice wavered. "We could die," Rhett corrected. "They've got numbers and position. If we start shooting, then we negotiate." Ashford had appeared from wherever he'd been sleeping, still pulling on his coat. "I'm a federal agent. They won't risk." They already shot at Eliza in front of a sheriff. "You think a federal badge is going to stop them when they're this desperate?" The hammering came again, harder. "Last warning, Calder. Send out the boy or we come in and take him." "Why?" Eliza shouted back, moving to the door but not opening it. "Why do you want him?" A different voice answered, older, smoother, unmistakably Boone's. "That's not your concern, woman. The boy's coming with us one way or another. How much blood gets spilled deciding that is up to you." "What did you do to his mother?" Eliza demanded. Silence, heavy and telling. Then Boone again, colder. "His mother violated our arrangement. She paid the price. The boy's going to pay it too unless you're smart enough to—" "She's dead?" The boy's voice, weak but audible, cut through everything. He'd woken, was standing in the doorway to the side room, Agnes trying to hold him back. "You killed Mama?" "Danny, get back," Agnes started, but the boy, Danny, pulled free and stumbled toward the front door. "You killed her! You killed her, and it's my fault. She said it was my fault." Rhett caught him before he reached the door, holding him despite his struggles. "Easy, son. Easy. Tell us what happened." Danny was crying now, great heaving sobs that shook his small frame. "Mama worked for him. At his house. She found papers, bad papers about the ranchers and the water, and she told me to run, told me to find help. But they caught her. I heard her screaming, 'Enough!'" Boone's voice was sharp. "The boy's confused. Fever dreams. He doesn't know what he's saying. He knows exactly what he's saying. Ashford had moved to the door, his hand on the knob. And so do I. You killed a woman for discovering evidence of your crimes, then tried to kill her son. That's murder, Boone. Federal murder charge. You're finished. I'm finished? Boone laughed, ugly and sharp. You're surrounded by my men with no help coming, and you think I'm finished? Hand over the boy. Last chance. Ashford looked at Rhett, at Eliza, at the small group of defenders who'd somehow become family. She could see him calculating odds, weighing options, trying to find a play that didn't end in massacre. We're not giving him to you, Eliza said, and even she was surprised by the steadiness in her voice. You'll have to come through us. That can be arranged. The crash of breaking wood meant they'd started on the back door. Sam swung his shotgun toward the sound, and suddenly everyone was moving, taking positions, preparing for the fight that was about to... The sound of hoofbeats stopped everything. Lots of hoofbeats coming fast, accompanied by shouts and the unmistakable authority of more voices than Boone's men could match. Through the window, Eliza saw the cavalry arriving. Not literal cavalry, but close enough. Martha on horseback, leading what looked like half the town. Amos and his boys. The Morrison ranch hands. The blacksmith. Even Sheriff Tucker looking uncomfortable but present. And at the front, carrying a rifle like he knew how to use it, was the town minister. A man Eliza had seen exactly once, who'd given her a kind nod and never judged her for her past. "Stand down!" Tucker's voice carried surprising authority. "All of you, weapons down now." "Sheriff, this is a private matter," Boone started. "This is attempted murder of a federal agent and a witness to murder. I'd call that pretty public." Tucker had found his spine somewhere, and it showed in the way he sat his horse. "I'm placing you under arrest, Boone. You and every man here. You can't..." "I can, and I am, because if I don't, these good people are going to tear you apart, and much as you might deserve it, I'd rather not have a lynching on my conscience." The standoff held for a moment that felt like hours. Boone's men looked at their boss, at the growing crowd of armed townspeople, at the very real possibility that this was the end. One by one, they lowered their weapons. Boone himself stayed mounted, his face a mask of rage barely contained. "This isn't over." "Yeah, it is." Ashford had emerged from the house, Danny held protectively against Rhett's side. "I've got a witness to murder. I've got documents that prove systematic fraud and land theft. And now I've got attempted murder of a federal agent to add to the list. You're done, Boone. Whatever empire you built, it's coming down." On the word of a child? On the word of multiple witnesses, documented evidence, and testimony from dozens of people you've victimized over the years. Ashford's smile was cold. "You thought you were untouchable. Turns out you were just good at scaring people until they decided to stop being scared." Tucker and several other men moved in, disarming Boone's crew, binding hands, reading off charges and voices that got stronger with each word. Boone went quietly in the end, but his eyes promised retribution, consequences, that this was somehow just a setback. Eliza didn't care. She watched him get led away and felt something unknot in her chest that had been tight for months, maybe years. The fear that had followed her from her old life, the certainty that powerful men always won in the end, it was finally beginning to loosen. Martha dismounted and came into the house, pulling Eliza into a fierce hug. "You all right?" "We're alive. That's all right enough for now." "When Cole came into town last night, told us what was happening, we started organizing immediately. Figured if Boone was desperate enough to come after you, he was desperate enough to do something stupid. Looks like we were right." "How'd you get Tucker to actually help?" Martha's smile was sharp. "Told him if he didn't, we'd run him out of the valley ourselves and find a sheriff who actually gave a damn about protecting people. Amazing how motivating the threat of unemployment can be." Over the next several hours, the house filled with people. Some came to give statements to Ashford, others to check on the boy, still others just to see for themselves that the siege had ended without bloodshed. The kitchen became a command center, Agnes treating minor injuries while Eliza made what felt like gallons of coffee. Danny stayed close to Rhett, and Eliza watched something unexpected happen. Saw the hard, closed-off man who'd greeted her with such coldness months ago soften around this traumatized child. Saw him speak gently, offer comfort, promise protection in a voice that left no room for doubt. "You'll stay with us," Rhett told Danny. "Long as you need to. Until we figure out if you've got family, or he stopped, swallowed, or until you decide what you want. Mama's really gone? Danny's voice was small. I'm sorry, son. Yeah, she is. She said if anything happened to her, I should find good people, people who'd help. He looked up at Rhett with eyes too old for his young face. Are you good people? Rhett glanced at Eliza, and she saw uncertainty there, self-doubt, the belief that he'd failed too many times to be considered good. We try, Eliza said, coming to kneel beside Danny. We make mistakes, and we're scared a lot, and we don't always know what we're doing, but we try, and we don't give up on people, not ever. Danny considered this, then nodded. Okay, I'll stay then, if that's all right. It's more than all right. As the crowd thinned and afternoon shifted toward evening, Ashford took Rhett and Eliza aside, his expression serious. I need to be straight with you. This case is going to take months to fully resolve. Boone's lawyers will fight every charge, drag out every proceeding. Even with Danny's testimony and the evidence we've gathered, it's going to be a battle. We've been battling, Rhett said simply. We can keep battling. I know, but there's something else. Ashford pulled out a document. In going through Boone's holdings, I found something interesting. That water rights transfer, it was done under false pretenses. The surveyor who certified it was on Boone's payroll, and the boundaries were deliberately misdrawn to make it look like he owned more than he did. Meaning the transfer is void. The water rights revert to their original holders, which includes you. And without those rights, most of Boone's land acquisitions in this valley fall apart. The whole structure was built on controlling the water. Eliza felt something like hope, real hope, beginning to bloom. So the ranch is secure, at least from that particular threat. You'll still have the normal struggles of running a ranch, but Boone can't force you out through legal manipulation anymore. The relief was so sudden and overwhelming that Eliza had to sit down. Rhett looked equally stunned, like he couldn't quite process that the thing they'd been fighting for might actually be theirs to keep. There's one more thing, Ashford continued. Boone's assets are going to be seized to pay restitution to his victims. That includes land, property, and significant liquid funds. As someone who was directly threatened and who suffered damages, he looked at them both. You'd be entitled to compensation. It won't be immediate, but eventually. We don't want his money, Rhett interrupted. Speak for yourself, Eliza said. We're barely making payroll. If there's compensation coming that's rightfully ours, I'm not too proud to take it. Rhett opened his mouth to argue, then seemed to really hear what she'd said. You're right. Pride's expensive. We can't afford it. Damn right we can't. She stood, squaring her shoulders. We'll take whatever compensation we're owed. We'll use it to make this ranch sustainable. And we'll build something that lasts, something Sarah would have been proud of. The mention of his wife's name made Rhett flinch, but not with pain this time, with something softer, acceptance maybe. Yeah, he said quietly. She would have liked that. Would have liked you. After Ashford left with promises to keep them informed of legal proceedings, after the last of the townspeople had departed with waves and promises of future support, after Danny had been fed and tucked into the spare room with Agnes watching over him, Eliza found herself alone with Rhett on the porch. The sun was setting, painting the land in colors that made it look less harsh. Almost beautiful, if you knew how to see it. And Eliza was learning how to see it, finding beauty in the struggle, value in the hardness, home in a place that had initially felt like punishment. We did it, she said. We actually did it. Not done yet. Ashford said months of legal fighting. But we won the important part. We stood up, and we didn't break. And people stood with us. She struggled for words adequate to the feeling. That's everything. Rhett was quiet for a moment, staring out at the land he'd almost lost, the home he'd been prepared to defend with his life. I couldn't have done this without you. Sure you could have. No, I couldn't. He turned to face her, and she saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. When you showed up here, I was barely alive, going through motions, waiting for the end. You changed that. Made me remember what it felt like to fight for something instead of just against things. Rhett, let me finish, please. He took a breath. I loved Sarah. I'll always love her. But she's gone, and I'm still here, and he reached out, took Eliza's hand. And you're here. You're real and present, and you fought beside me for something we both believed in. That matters. You matter. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes and didn't bother hiding them. You matter too. This place matters. Danny matters. All of it. It's become my life, not the life I planned or expected, but it's worth living. Yeah, it is. He kissed her then, gentle and tentative, asking rather than taking. She kissed him back, pouring into it all the fear and hope and desperate determination that had brought her to this moment. It wasn't perfect. Their noses bumped, and she was crying, and he was shaking slightly. But it was real, honest, built on shared struggle rather than romantic fantasy. When they pulled apart, Rhett rested his forehead against hers. Stay. Not as a housekeeper, not as someone who works here. Stay as... He struggled for the word. As family, Eliza finished. As someone who belongs here. As yours. And as mine, he agreed. If you'll have me. Broken pieces and all. We're all broken pieces. Maybe that's the point. Maybe we're supposed to figure out how to fit together anyway. They stood there as darkness gathered, two people who'd been cast off by the world they'd known, finding something unexpected in the place they'd landed. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There would still be hard days, financial struggles, the ongoing legal battle with Boone's empire. Danny would need time and patience to heal from his trauma. The ranch would demand everything they had and then ask for more. But they'd face it together, not alone anymore. Not running from the past, but building toward a future that was theirs to define. Inside, Agnes was singing something soft to Danny, a lullaby that drifted out through the open window. In the barn, Sam was settling the horses for the night, his movements efficient and familiar. Cole was checking the fence line one last time, taking his responsibilities seriously in a way that suggested he was finally growing into the man he wanted to be. The ranch was alive with people who'd chosen to be here, who'd made family out of necessity and proximity and shared struggle. It wasn't blood that bound them, but something stronger, the decision to stand together when standing alone meant falling. Over the next weeks and months, the valley began to heal. Ashford's investigation uncovered the full scope of Boone's corruption, and one by one, people came forward with stories of intimidation, theft, and abuse that had been hidden for years. The legal proceedings were exactly as complicated as promised, but the outcome was never really in doubt. Boone had overreached, gotten sloppy in his arrogance, and now he was paying the price. His land holdings were broken up and redistributed. Families who'd been forced out were given the opportunity to return. The water rights were restored to their rightful owners, and the creek ran freely again, feeding ranches that had been slowly dying. Danny stayed with them, becoming in practice what he'd become in their hearts, their son. He had nightmares sometimes, and there were days when grief hit him like a physical blow, but slowly, gradually, he healed. He helped with the ranch work, learned to ride, found in Rhett the father figure he'd never had, and in Eliza the mother he'd lost too soon. The ranch itself became something different than it had been. The garden expanded until they were supplying half the valley with vegetables. They added chickens, then a few pigs, diversifying income streams until the financial pressure finally began to ease. The compensation from Boone's seized assets came through eventually, not as much as they'd hoped, but enough to pay off debts and give them breathing room. Martha opened a second saloon on the strength of loans from the townspeople who'd stood together against Boone. Amos's general store expanded. The Morrison family reclaimed their ranch and made it profitable again. Sheriff Tucker, to everyone's surprise, actually became a decent lawman once he wasn't under Boone's thumb. The valley learned what it was like to be free. On a morning 6 months after Boone's arrest, Eliza stood in Sarah's garden, her garden now, she supposed, and looked at what they'd built. The vegetables were thriving, the flowers she'd planted were beginning to bloom, and this whole space had transformed from a memorial to something living and productive. Rhett found her there, Danny trailing behind him, the boy chattering about something he'd seen near the creek. They made an unlikely family, the grieving widower, the cast-off woman, the traumatized child. But they worked. They fit. Thinking deep thoughts? Rhett asked, slipping an arm around her waist. Thinking about how far we've come, about how close we came to losing everything. But we didn't. No, we didn't. She leaned into him, watching Danny chase a butterfly through the garden rows. You think Sarah would approve? Of us? Of this? I think Sarah would have loved you, would have been glad I found someone who could put up with me. He paused. And I think she'd be happy that her garden's alive again, that this place is alive again. It's ours now, really ours. It always was. We just had to fight to keep it. Danny caught the butterfly, then immediately released it, laughing as it flew away. He ran over to them, his face bright with excitement. Did you see? Did you see how long I held it? We saw, Eliza said, ruffling his hair. Very impressive. Now go wash up. Lunch in 10 minutes. Can we have those biscuits again, the ones with honey? Maybe, if you finish your chores after. He groaned dramatically but ran off toward the house, already calling for Sam to tell him about the butterfly. Eliza watched him go, this child who'd stumbled into their lives and made them complete in a way she hadn't known they needed. We should make it official, Rhett said suddenly. Make what official? Danny. Adopt him properly, and... He turned to face her, and she saw nervousness mixed with determination in his expression. And us. Get married. Make this family legal in every way that matters. Eliza's heart did something complicated in her chest. She'd been married before, had the scars to prove it, and she'd sworn she'd never put herself in that position again. But this was different. Rhett was different. This whole fragile, beautiful thing they'd built was different. Yes, she said simply. Yes to which part? Yes to all of it. Danny deserves stability and a real family. And I... She took his hand. I want this. Want you. Want all of it, official and legal and permanent. He kissed her, and this time there was nothing tentative about it. This was a promise, a claim, a statement that they were choosing each other fully and without reservation. When they finally pulled apart, Eliza was smiling so hard her face hurt. You know this means you're stuck with me, she warned. No changing your mind when I get difficult. You're already difficult. I'm counting on it. And you're stubborn. We're well matched then. They walked back to the house together, leaving the garden to grow on its own for a while. Inside, Agnes had arrived to check on Danny and stayed for lunch, as she'd taken to doing more and more often. Sam and Cole were already at the table, arguing good-naturedly about something horse-related. Jacob had brought news from town. Boone's final appeal had been denied, and he'd be spending the next decade in a federal prison. Eliza served the meal she'd prepared, watching her found family gather around the table with a contentment she'd never expected to feel. This loud, chaotic, imperfect group of people had become her anchor in a world that had tried repeatedly to cast her adrift. I've got an announcement, Rhett said once everyone was settled. The table went quiet. Eliza and I are getting married, and we're adopting Danny, making everything official. The silence lasted exactly 2 seconds before it erupted into congratulations and questions, and Cole demanding to know if there'd be cake at the wedding. Danny launched himself at both of them, hugging with the fierce intensity of a child who'd finally found a place to belong. The celebration went late, and by the time everyone had dispersed to their various corners of the ranch, Eliza was exhausted in the best possible way. She stood at the window of her room, soon to be their room, she supposed, and looked out at land that had tested her in every possible way and found she was strong enough to meet it. She'd arrived here with nothing, cast off, desperate at the end of every option. She'd expected to survive at best, to endure until something better came along or she finally gave up trying. Instead, she'd found a home, a family, a purpose that went beyond simple survival. She'd learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to stand firm despite it. That strength came not from perfection, but from getting back up after being knocked down. That love, real love, the kind worth having, was built on shared struggle and mutual respect, not grand romantic gestures. The land stretched dark beyond her window, no longer threatening but familiar. Home. Hers in a way that had nothing to do with legal ownership and everything to do with the sweat and tears and stubbornness she'd invested in it. Red appeared in her doorway, silhouetted by lamplight. You all right? More than all right. I was just thinking, dangerous habit. About how I ended up here. About how this was supposed to be my last option before giving up completely. She turned to face him. And instead it became my first option, my only option. The place where I finally stopped running. Oh, I'm glad you stopped here. Me too. He crossed to her and they stood together looking out at the ranch, at the future they'd fought so hard to secure. It wouldn't be easy, nothing worth having ever was. There would be hard winters and dry summers and setbacks that would test them. But they'd face it together, this unlikely family bound by choice rather than blood. The ranch would endure because they would endure, not in spite of the hardship, but because of it, because struggle had forged them into something stronger than they'd been alone. In the spare room, Danny slept peacefully for the first time in months, his nightmares held at bay by the certainty that he was safe and wanted and home. In the bunkhouse, Sam and Cole settled in for the night, already planning tomorrow's work with the easy confidence of men who knew their purpose. Across the valley, families that had been scattered were rebuilding, united by the shared experience of standing together against impossible odds. And in the ranch house, Eliza Vance, soon to be Eliza Calder, leaned into the man who'd become her partner in every sense, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the absence of challenge or the promise of easy days ahead, but the bone-deep certainty that whatever came, she could face it, that she was no longer alone, no longer disposable, no longer the woman the world had thrown away. She was home, and home was worth every sacrifice it had taken to keep it.